After 8 years of marriage, my husband Preston abandoned me with divorce papers, coldly stating I wasn't the wife he needed anymore. Just 1 week later, he married a dazzling, wealthy woman. Months passed. Then, in a frantic call, he confessed their newborn baby looked nothing like either of them. That's when I dropped the bombshell. His new wife was my estranged stepsister, Genevieve, who had undergone a complete transformation. But before that chilling revelation, before the world fractured into irreparable pieces, there was a time I believed Preston and I had built a life as solid as the foundations of our apartment building. We had just celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary. Or rather, I had planned to. In those days, my days revolved around him, around us. I'd spent countless hours curating our home, transforming it from a sterile box into a sanctuary, a place where laughter echoed, and quiet moments felt profound. I loved being his wife, loved nurturing the space where our shared dreams were meant to flourish. I often revisited those early days in my mind, the quiet magic of our beginnings. We'd met in college, a clumsy encounter in the campus library where he'd knocked over my pile of books, and then spent an hour helping me reorganize them, charming me with his earnest apologies and quick wit. He was ambitious, even then, eyes bright with the promise of a future he was determined to carve out. I was drawn to his drive, his easy confidence that felt like a steady hand guiding us forward. We'd spent late nights studying, our hands brushing over textbooks, then late nights dreaming, sketching out a life together over cheap coffee, a house with a garden, challenging careers, travel, children. Our first apartment, barely big enough for our combined optimism, felt like a palace. He'd proposed on a rainy Tuesday morning, not with a grand gesture, but with a simple, heartfelt question over soggy toast, promising me a lifetime of shared simple moments. That was the Preston I fell in love with. The man who saw me, truly saw me, and wanted nothing more than to build a world around us. For years, it felt like we were living that dream. We navigated career changes, celebrated promotions, comforted each other through losses. Our routine was a comforting rhythm. Mornings with coffee and shared news, evenings filled with his stories from work and my updates on my own projects. I believed in the silent language of our marriage, the unspoken understanding that bound us. When he started working longer hours, his phone a constant companion, even at dinner, I told myself it was simply the price of success. When his responses grew shorter, his gaze often distant, I chalked it up to stress, the immense pressure of his high-stakes job. He was a man with responsibilities after all. And I, his devoted wife, would be his anchor, his refuge. I tried harder, I really did. I researched new recipes, planned weekend getaways, bought tickets to concerts I knew he'd enjoy. I sought out new lingerie, convinced a spark could always be rekindled with enough effort, enough desire. Sometimes, he'd offer a brief, distracted smile, a perfunctory kiss. Other times, he'd barely notice. "You're tired, honey," I'd murmur, reaching for his hand across the dinner table, only for him to pull it back to check an email. "You need to relax." He would nod, his eyes already on the screen, a subtle but growing distance blooming between us that I desperately tried to ignore. It felt like a slow, creeping frost, chilling the edges of our once vibrant connection. I told myself it was a phase, that all marriages had their ebbs and flows, that the man I loved was still there, just buried under the weight of his ambitions. I told myself everything would be fine, if only I kept trying, kept holding on. I was a professional at ignoring the subtle tremor in the ground beneath my feet, convinced it was just a passing vibration, not the precursor to an earthquake. That desperate conviction was never stronger than in the weeks leading up to our 8th wedding anniversary. I poured every ounce of my dwindling hope into making that night perfect, a deliberate, intricate tapestry designed to mend the frayed edges of our connection. I wanted to remind Preston of the magic we once shared, to whisk us back to those simpler times, even if just for one evening. My planning was meticulous, almost obsessive. I spent hours leafing through cookbooks, searching for a recipe that wasn't just delicious, but evocative. Something that tasted of comfort and celebration, a dish he'd once raved about from a small Italian restaurant we'd frequented in our early days. I chose the finest wine, a vintage he particularly enjoyed, carefully decanting it to breathe just so. The playlist was curated with songs from our college days, tracks that marked milestones in our relationship, each note a whispered memory. I even bought a new dress, a silken emerald green that shimmered, hoping it would catch his eye, remind him of the woman he'd pursued with such ardent passion. The table was set with our wedding china. Candles flickered softly, casting a warm glow on the polished wood, and a bouquet of white roses, my favorite, stood proudly in the center, their delicate fragrance filling the air. Every detail was an unspoken plea, a desperate effort to recreate the intimacy that had slowly, imperceptibly, withered away. Inside, I rehearsed the evening in my mind, envisioning his delighted surprise, his arms wrapping around me, his eyes finally meeting mine with that familiar warmth. I wanted to see the man I married, the one whose ambition once felt like a shared dream, not a wall between us. I wanted to feel his presence, not just his physical proximity. Was I being foolish? Perhaps. But hope, even the most fragile kind, clung stubbornly to my heart. I told myself that love was effort, that marriage was a garden that needed constant tending, and I was willing to water it, prune it, fight off every creeping weed until it bloomed again. This anniversary dinner wasn't just a meal, it was my last desperate stand. My anxieties, however, were a constant, unwelcome hum beneath the surface of my determined optimism. Preston's emotional withdrawal had become a gaping chasm between us. He rarely lingered over breakfast anymore, already absorbed in emails before his first sip of coffee. Conversations became clipped, transactional. When I spoke about my day, his replies were often grunts or absent-minded "hmms" as he scrolled through his phone. He'd lost interest in the small, intimate details of our shared life. The new book I was reading, the funny thing a neighbor's dog did, the subtle changes I'd made to the living room decor. It was as if he was living in a different dimension, one where my world didn't quite overlap with his. The late nights had become the norm. He'd often call around 9. A curt, "I'll be late, don't wait up," before hanging up, leaving me in the quiet expanse of our apartment, the dinner I'd prepared growing cold. When he finally did arrive, sometimes well past midnight, he moved like a phantom, avoiding eye contact. His footsteps hushed. I'd pretend to be asleep, listening to the soft click of the bedroom door, the rustle of his clothes as he changed in the dark. The scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his shirts had become a phantom fragrance in my imagination, a fear I pushed away with furious scrubbing in the laundry room. He rarely initiated touch, and when I reached for him, he'd stiffen, murmuring about being tired. Sex had become a distant memory, replaced by the hollow ache of loneliness. I longed for the days when his presence filled every room, when his laughter was the soundtrack to our evenings. Now, his absence, even when he was physically there, was deafening. He was like a beautiful, intricately carved ship, once sailing proudly, now moored in a distant harbor, its sails furled, its captain nowhere in sight, and I, the lighthouse keeper, kept the light burning, hoping against hope that he would one day return to shore. It was exhausting, this relentless performance of being the perfect wife, the one who understood, who supported, who never complained, all while my own heart was quietly fracturing. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't, not yet. I still had the anniversary dinner. I still had hope. The candles flickered, melting steadily into pools of wax. The carefully chosen wine, decanted to perfection, remained untouched. 8 o'clock became 9, then 10. Each passing minute was a small, agonizing puncture in the balloon of my carefully constructed hope. The fragrant steam from the Italian dish had long dissipated, leaving behind a congealed testament to my efforts. The emerald dress, once a symbol of renewed desire, now felt like a costume for a play cancelled without warning. My first call to Preston's phone went straight to voicemail. A mechanical voice informing me he was unavailable. He's probably just in a meeting running late, I told myself, trying to quell the tremor in my hands. I waited 20 minutes, trying to conjure rational explanations, each one thinner than the last. Then another call. Voicemail again. My heart, which had been performing a tightrope walk all evening, began to pound against my ribs. Dread, a cold, insidious vine, began to curl around my throat. I tried his office line, knowing it was a futile gesture at this hour, yet desperate for any sign. The familiar, automated message played, a bland assurance of office hours that felt like a cruel joke. I sent a text, short and deceptively casual. Everything okay? Dinner's ready, missing you. No response. An hour later, a more urgent one. Preston, please call me, I'm worried. Still nothing. The silence from his end was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me in the quiet grandeur of our meticulously prepared dining room. The disappointment wasn't a gentle wave, it was a crashing tsunami, dismantling everything I had built, everything I had hoped for. This wasn't just a missed dinner. It was the final, undeniable proof of his complete disengagement. The man who had promised me a lifetime of simple moments couldn't even manage one anniversary dinner. My dawning realization was a bitter pill. Something was terribly fundamentally wrong, far beyond stress or late meetings. This felt deliberate, a calculated absence that tore at the very fabric of my trust. I sat there, surrounded by the ruins of my romantic gesture, the soft candlelight now mocking my solitude. Tears blurred my vision. But they weren't hot and angry. They were cold, silent tears of utter desolation. It was past midnight when my phone finally chimed. Not with a call, but an email notification. My stomach clenched. Preston rarely emailed me, certainly not this late. And definitely not without a prior call or text. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The subject line was stark. Our marriage. No hi Audrey. No my dearest. Not even a simple Audrey. Just that chillingly formal, possessive, our marriage? My breath hitched in my throat as I read the words, each one a hammer blow to my already fractured heart. Audrey, I'm writing to inform you that I've decided to move forward with a divorce. Our marriage has, for some time, ceased to be what I need or envision for my future. I've instructed my attorney to prepare the necessary papers, which will be delivered to you shortly. I believe this is the best path for both of us to find the happiness we deserve. I wish you well. It was signed simply, Preston. No explanation, no apology, no discussion. Just a cold, impersonal decree delivered via email on the night of our 8th wedding anniversary. My world didn't just collapse, it imploded. The words swam before my eyes, then sharpened into brutal clarity. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't stress. This was an ending, swift and merciless. My hands began to shake uncontrollably, the phone slipping from my grasp to clatter onto the pristine tablecloth, staining it with the remains of my shattered hope. I stared at the screen, at his name. At the finality of it all, the air left my lungs in a ragged gasp, and a raw, guttural cry tore from my throat, a sound I barely recognized as my own. The candles, now burning low, cast long, dancing shadows, turning our sanctuary into a tomb. I spent the rest of that night on the floor of our dining room, curled into a ball, clutching the cold, unresponsive phone, the email glowing like a malevolent beacon, illuminating the barren landscape of my future. The perfect dinner sat untouched, a monument to a love that, for him, had evidently died long ago. The dawn broke gray and unforgiving through the dining room windows, painting the untouched feast in stark relief. My body was stiff, my mind a churning vortex of disbelief. Preston's email, still glowing on the phone screen where it had fallen, felt like a cruel prank, a twisted nightmare I was desperate to wake from. Even as the words divorce echoed like a death knell in my ears, a desperate, irrational part of me clung to the mundane, to the habits of our shared life. Work. He was always at work. Perhaps, if I could just speak times to him, hear his voice, he would explain, retract, say it was a terrible mistake, an outburst of frustration. It had to be. My logical brain, however shattered, refused to believe that the man I'd spent 8 years building a life with could deliver such a cold, final blow without a single human conversation. With shaking fingers, I retrieved the phone. My official call, not to his personal line, which had been silent for hours, but to his corporate office. It was early, barely 7. But Preston was always the first one in, driven by an ambition I once admired. His assistant, Laura, a brisk but kind woman, usually arrived by 8. But a faint hope urged me to try now, on the off chance Preston himself would pick up. The phone rang twice before Laura's familiar, cheerful voice answered, surprisingly early. A tiny, fragile spark of relief ignited in my chest. "Laura, it's Audrey. Is Preston in yet?" I tried to keep my voice steady, professional, as if this were just a routine check-in, not a desperate plea for reassurance. There was a pause. A longer pause than usual. The cheerfulness in her voice evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable hesitancy. "Audrey," she began, her tone shifting to one of genuine sympathy. I thought you knew. Mr. Thompson hasn't been with us for 2 weeks now." He tendered his resignation quite suddenly. The world tilted. My breath caught, then shattered. "What?" The single word was a raw whisper, barely audible, ripped from a throat suddenly constricted by ice. 2 weeks? 2 weeks he'd been gone from his high-stakes job, the career he'd poured his entire being into, the supposed source of all his late nights and distant gazes. And I, his wife, had known nothing, absolutely nothing. The receiver slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the pristine tablecloth next to the cold remnants of our anniversary dinner. Laura's voice, now muffled, faded into a distant hum as a dizzying cascade of realizations crashed over me. The late nights, the vague excuses, the growing chasm between us, they weren't about work stress. They were about a carefully constructed escape. He hadn't just left me asterisk. He'd systematically vanished from our entire shared reality, meticulously erasing his footprints, severing every tie, one by one, before delivering the final, surgical cut. This wasn't an impulsive decision born of frustration. This wasn't a marriage that had simply withered away. This was a premeditated exit, a calculated demolition. He hadn't merely fallen out of love. He had been building a new life, brick by brick, behind my back, while I stood there, watering the dead garden of our marriage, clinging to a hope he had already murdered. The divorce email wasn't a sudden regrettable necessity. It was the final cruel stroke of a man who had already moved on, already begun his new life, long before he dared to tell me. The tremor beneath my feet wasn't a precursor to an earthquake. It was the ground splitting open beneath me, revealing an abyss far deeper and darker than I could have imagined. My husband wasn't just abandoning me. He was exposing a complete, horrifying stranger. The betrayal wasn't just in his words. It was in every silent, deceitful day that had led up to this. Every "I'll be late," every "just work stress," every distant look was now replayed in my mind, recontextualized as a deliberate lie. He had not merely fallen out of love. He had actively, ruthlessly orchestrated my downfall. And the worst part? He had done it without a single shred of remorse, without a flicker of acknowledgement for the 8 years we had shared. I stood there, utterly hollowed out, staring at the ruins of a life that had, for months, been nothing but a meticulously crafted illusion. The illusion shattered, leaving behind a silence so profound it buzzed in my ears. I didn't know how long I stood there. Phone dropped, the email still burning bright on its screen. Time had ceased to be linear. It was a fragmented collection of sharp pains and dull aches. Then, the sound that tore through the stupor, the distinct click of a key turning in the lock, his Times key. The front door opened slowly, revealing Preston. He didn't look like a man who had just delivered a death blow to his wife of 8 years. He looked immaculate. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair neatly combed, his expression unreadable, almost placid. There was no defiance, no regret, no awkwardness in his posture. He simply walked into the apartment, the very space we had built together. As if it were a hotel lobby he was merely passing through. He didn't flinch at the sight of the untouched anniversary dinner, the wilting roses, or my own disheveled appearance. Eyes red-rimmed and soul-crushed. He barely glanced at me. "Preston," I managed, my voice a ragged whisper. The sound was alien, raw with a pain I hadn't known could exist. What is this? Your email?" And Laura said. My words trailed off, choking on the sheer enormity of his deception. He turned. Finally. His gaze sweeping over me with an unnerving detachment. It was the look one might give a stranger. Or perhaps a piece of furniture that no longer served its purpose. "I see you received my email," he said. His voice level, devoid of any emotion. "And you've apparently spoken to my former assistant." "Yes. I left the firm 2 weeks ago." He walked to the dining table. Not to sit, but to place a thick envelope squarely amidst the romantic ruins. It was stark white, legal-sized. "The papers are all there. My attorney will be in touch with yours to finalize the details." My stomach churned. A desperate, irrational anger finally breaking through the numbness. "My attorney? You think I have an attorney? Preston, we've been married for 8 years. 8 years. And you send me an email? You quit your job without telling me? What the hell is going on?" I felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate need to tear through his icy facade. To find the man I knew beneath this cruel stranger. He sighed. A faint, almost imperceptible exhalation of exasperation, as if I were being unreasonable. "Audrey, there's no need for hysterics, it's all in the email. Our marriage is no longer what I need. I've moved on." "Moved on?" The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. "Moved on? What does that even mean? What did I do wrong, Preston? Tell me. Was I not enough? Did I not try hard enough?" My voice cracked, tears streaming down my face. But I didn't care. I needed answers. I deserved answers. He finally met my gaze, but there was no warmth, no empathy. Only a cold, clinical assessment. "You didn't do anything wrong, Audrey. You simply stopped evolving. You were content with this." He gestured vaguely around the apartment, encompassing our life, our shared history, this smallness. While I was striving for more, you were perfectly happy to keep tending to a life that had no room for my ambitions, my real potential. You couldn't keep up. "Keep up?" I echoed, aghast. "I supported you. I believed in you. I built a home for you while you chased your ambitions. I was your partner." A flicker of something disdain, perhaps, crossed his face. "You were a wife, yes. A good one. In your own way. But I need more than that. I need someone who understands the world I'm moving into. Someone who can navigate the complexities, the opportunities. You were always so comfortable. Too comfortable. Our lives diverged, Audrey, long ago. I just chose to acknowledge it." He paused, then delivered the final, crushing blow. "I've found someone who aligns with my vision for the future. Someone who is everything I need. I'm starting a new life. A new life. With someone else." The sheer audacity, the callousness of it, took my breath away. He hadn't just left me. He was replacing me, justifying it with a litany of my supposed inadequacies. My mind reeled, flashing back to every late night I'd waited, every worried call I'd made, every silent plea for connection. He'd seen them not as expressions of love, but as chains, holding him back. "So, all those years," I whispered, the anger draining away, replaced by a deep, aching emptiness. "All our dreams, our plans, they meant nothing?" Preston shrugged, adjusting his cuff. "They served their purpose at the time. People change, Audrey. What we needed then isn't what we need now." He turned to leave, his hand already on the doorknob. I'll have movers here next week for my things. Please be available. Or have a friend present. My lawyer will handle everything else. He walked out, leaving the door ajar. A cruel metaphor for the way he had exited our life. No lingering glance. No final word of false sentiment. Just the chilling click of the lock as he secured the door behind him, sealing me inside the tomb he had just exposed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The capacity for raw emotion had been stripped away, leaving behind a profound, glacial numbness. I stumbled towards the table, my fingers brushing against the cold, pristine paper of the divorce petition. Each clause, each legal term, was a monument to his calculated indifference. He had planned this, meticulously. My role in his life had been systematically dismantled, item by item, without my knowledge, without my consent. The apartment, once our sanctuary, now felt like a vast, echoing prison. Every object, every photograph, every shared memory now felt tainted, a cruel reminder of a love I had believed in, a future I had cherished. All of it built on a foundation of his carefully constructed lies. I was adrift, alone in the wreckage, with nothing but the cold, hard reality of the papers in my hand, and the terrifying, empty expanse of a future I had to somehow build from scratch. The beginning he was so eager for was the end of everything I had known. And I was left to pick up the pieces. Alone. The apartment, once a sanctuary echoing with the ghost of a love I'd believed in, transformed overnight into a stark, echoing testament to my failure. Moving out was not a choice. It was a sentence, delivered with the chilling precision of Preston's departure. Each packing box felt like a coffin for a memory, sealing away 8 years of a life that, I now realized, had been meticulously unraveled by one man while I watered its dying roots. His things were gone swiftly, efficiently, handled by movers I never saw, leaving behind yawning empty spaces that mirrored the cavern in my chest. There was no note, no final word, just the clinical efficiency of an exit orchestrated by lawyers. My own packing was a slower, more agonizing process, each item picked up, considered, and either discarded or carefully placed into a box marked "New Life." A label that felt more like a cruel joke than a promise. I walked through rooms that once held our laughter, our quiet conversations, and saw only the imprints of a deceit I had been too naive to recognize. The smell of our home, once comforting, now felt stale, tainted by the lie that had festered beneath its surface. Every framed photograph, every shared gift, every piece of furniture we had chosen together, became a mute accuser. I found myself staring at our wedding album, its pages filled with joyous faces, and wondered if the man smiling back at me from those glossy prints was merely an actor in a play I hadn't realized was being performed. The emotional toll was immense. A constant, dull ache that settled deep in my bones, making even the simplest tasks feel monumental. Getting out of bed was an act of defiance. Showering a struggle against the weight of despair that threatened to pin me down. I'd lose hours just staring at a wall, my mind a blank canvas, yet simultaneously a swirling vortex of anger, confusion, and overwhelming sadness. My new apartment was a stark contrast to the home Preston and I had shared. It was smaller, functional, with walls painted a neutral beige that offered no comfort, no personality. The windows overlooked a busy street instead of our quiet garden. It was a place to exist, not to thrive. At least not yet. Unpacking felt impossible. Most of my belongings remained in boxes, a transient existence mirroring my own shattered sense of self. I ate microwaved meals, if I ate at all, and slept fitfully, often waking in a cold sweat from dreams of Preston's indifferent face. Loneliness, sharp and insidious, became my constant companion, whispering doubts and recriminations in the silence of my new empty rooms. Was I truly not enough? Had I misread everything for 8 years? The questions spun in an endless, cruel loop. But even in that desolate landscape, a lifeline appeared. Sheridan, my best friend, a force of nature with a heart as fiercely loyal as her wit was sharp, refused to let me drown. The moment I finally managed to call her, my voice raw with unshed tears. Her immediate visceral fury on my behalf was like a sudden burst of warmth in the glacial numbness. "That bastard! That absolute self-serving bastard!" she'd roared, her anger a powerful purifying counterpoint to my quiet despair. 8 years? An email? Who does that? She didn't just offer platitudes. She offered unwavering presence. She brought casseroles and talked me through the legal jargon I couldn't comprehend. She dragged me out for walks, even when my eyes were swollen and my spirit was broken. She sat with me on the floor of my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, and just listened. Sometimes for hours, without judgment, without interruption. When I confessed the gnawing self-doubt, the feeling of being inadequate, she fixed me with an intense gaze. "Audrey, listen to me. This has nothing to do with you. This is about him asterisk, his cowardice, his selfishness. You gave him 8 years of your life, your love, your devotion. He chose to throw it away for whatever delusion he's chasing. Don't you dare let him take your worth too." Her words, though simple, began to chip away at the fortress of my despair. Sheridan reminded me of the woman I was before Preston, the woman I still was. Beneath the layers of betrayal and grief, she held my hand as I signed the legal documents. Her presence a silent promise that I wasn't truly alone. She helped me pick out a new vibrant duvet cover, a tiny defiant splash of color in my beige world. Slowly, hesitantly, I started to take small steps towards self-reliance. I learned to navigate the grocery store aisles alone, to cook for one, to find a semblance of routine. The despair hadn't vanished, but it no longer consumed every waking moment. It receded, sometimes, allowing glimpses of a future where I might, just might, find my footing again. Sheridan's belief in me became the echo of a belief I was slowly, painstakingly trying to resurrect within myself. She was the lighthouse keeper, keeping my time's light burning, guiding me back to a shore I was only just beginning to imagine. Months drifted by, each one a slow, deliberate stitch in the fabric of my mending life. The raw wounds of betrayal had begun to scab over, leaving tender, often painful scars, but no longer bleeding freely. My small apartment, once a beige box of despair, was slowly acquiring touches of my personality. A vibrant piece of art on the wall, a collection of fragrant herbs on the windowsill, a comfortable armchair where I'd begun to read again. Sheridan's unwavering support, coupled with my own stubborn refusal to let Preston's cruelty define me, had forged a fragile but growing sense of self-reliance. I was learning to breathe again, to exist without the constant, suffocating weight of his absence. The thought of him, once a visceral pang, had receded into a dull, distant ache, largely overshadowed by the quiet victories of my reclaimed independence. Then, one Tuesday, a plain white envelope arrived in the mail, nestled among bills and junk flyers. It was thicker than a standard letter, addressed to me in elegant, unfamiliar cursive. My name, Audrey Thompson, written in a flourish that felt both old-fashioned and ostentatious. My surname, it was still mine. For now, though I had already begun the process of reverting to my maiden name. A flicker of unease went through me. No return address. Just a postmark from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Preston had moved out of state. I vaguely remembered hearing through a mutual acquaintance, but I hadn't given it much thought. Now, that detail clung to me, unsettling. With a cautious hand I tore open the seal. Inside, folded neatly, was a single sheet of heavy parchment paper, embossed with an official seal. It was a marriage certificate. Not mine, certainly. My blood ran cold as I saw Preston's name, clear as day, at the top. Asterisk, Preston Alexander Thompson asterisk, my ex-husband, and next to it, the name of his new wife. Asterisk, Genevieve Ellis Whitmore asterisk. The date of the marriage, starkly printed, was exactly 1 week after our own divorce papers had been filed. 1 week. While I was still reeling, still struggling to comprehend the wreckage of our 8 years, He had been exchanging vows with someone new. The certificate was meticulously detailed. A testament to a life I knew nothing about. It listed Genevieve Ellis Whitmore's age, her place of birth, her parents' names. She was younger than me, significantly so. Her profession was listed as philanthropist, a word that conjured images of old money and glittering galas, a stark contrast to my own modest life as a librarian. The ceremony had taken place in an exclusive country club, the kind of lavish affair Preston had always claimed to disdain. Every single detail felt like a deliberate slap in the face, a carefully crafted insult designed to highlight the vast chasm between our two realities. The stark white paper, the formal script, the official seals. It wasn't just a document, it was a declaration, a public, undeniable proclamation of his new, better life. I stared at the name, Genevieve Ellis Whitmore for a long time. It was a beautiful name, elegant and resonant, yet it carried an odd, almost phantom familiarity. Like a tune heard once in a dream, I couldn't place it. Not exactly, but a subtle shiver ran down my spine, a whisper of something distant and unsettling. How quickly he had moved on, not just into a new life, but into a life of apparent privilege and wealth that he had so desperately sought, and so coldly claimed I couldn't keep up with. The sheer audacity of it, sending this formal proof of his happiness, his swift, seamless transition, to me, the woman he had so brutally discarded, a renewed wave of betrayal, sharper and colder than before, washed over me. It wasn't the searing pain of the initial divorce, but a slow, insidious burn of humiliation. All those months I had spent grappling with my self-worth, questioning every moment of our shared past, painstakingly trying to rebuild myself. He had been living this grand, opulent new existence. While I was learning to cook for one in my quiet apartment, he was marrying a philanthropist in a country club. The contrast was so grotesque, so profoundly unfair, that it twisted a fresh knot of bitterness in my stomach. He hadn't just moved on. He had ascended, and he wanted me to know it. The certificate wasn't merely a formality. It was a cruel, final assertion of his victory, a triumphant flourish in the narrative he was so determined to write for himself. My breath hitched, a choked sound in the quiet of my apartment. The fragile peace I had painstakingly cultivated, the small steps I had taken towards healing, felt utterly annihilated by this single piece of paper. He had not only abandoned me, but had replaced me, and in doing so, had delivered another, more insidious blow to my already bruised spirit. The question echoed in my mind, cold and clear. Who was this woman? And why did her name feel so oddly, unnervingly familiar? Genevieve Ellis Whitmore. The name tasted like ash on my tongue, even as it settled with a disquieting familiarity in the hollows of my memory. Ellis. That was it. Genevieve Ellis, my estranged stepsister. The realization, slow and insidious, felt like a viper uncoiling in my gut. No, it couldn't be. Preston wouldn't. Could he? The floodgates burst open, unleashing a torrent of long-buried memories. Memories I had painstakingly bricked away after my father's second marriage, a futile attempt to protect myself from the emotional chaos Genevieve brought into our lives. My father, a man of quiet integrity, had, in his loneliness, fallen for Barbara, a woman whose superficial charm concealed a calculating mind. With Barbara came Genevieve, her daughter from a previous marriage, a few years older than me, with sharp, assessing eyes that always seemed to size me up, find me wanting. Genevieve had been a chameleon even then, effortlessly adapting to situations, always seeking advantage. She was beautiful, yes, but her beauty was a weapon, honed and precise. From the moment she stepped into our quiet home, a dark current of envy flowed beneath her polite smiles. She resented my father's quiet affection for me, the natural ease I had in our shared space. She coveted my life. Not for what it was, but for what she believed it represented: stability, genuine connection, a love that wasn't conditional. My father, blinded by his newfound happiness with Barbara, failed to see the subtle cruelties, the insidious manipulations. I remembered vividly the incident with my art project, a painstaking watercolor landscape I'd worked on for weeks, destined for a school competition. Genevieve, with a sweet, innocent smile, had offered to help me carry it, only for her elbow to accidentally jolt, sending a splash of muddy brown paint across the vibrant green hills. Her apologies were profuse, her eyes wide with feigned remorse, but I saw the triumphant glint, the almost imperceptible smirk when she thought no one was looking. Or the time she forgot to pass along a message from my crush in high school, leading to a painfully awkward misunderstanding. She was a master of sowing discord, whispering doubts, always positioning herself as the more worldly, more sophisticated, more times deserving times daughter. "Audrey is so naive," she'd once told my father, just loud enough for me to hear. "She lives in her own little world. Life isn't always a fairy tale, Daddy." She had called him Daddy long before Barbara and he were married. A possessive move that felt like a deliberate stake in the ground. She was constantly comparing, always subtly tearing me down to elevate herself. Her ambitions were overt, almost aggressive. She wanted status, wealth, a life that glittered, and she saw my contentedness, my academic pursuits, my simple joys, as weaknesses to be exploited. Our house, once a haven, became a battleground of passive aggression and unspoken resentments. The tension between us escalated over the years, until it finally broke during my sophomore year of college. A particularly vicious fight, fueled by Genevieve's accusation that I was riding on my father's coattails, and her dismissive sneer at my chosen field of study, ended with me screaming that I wished she'd never entered our lives. She had simply smiled, a chillingly calm expression on her face, and said, "Don't worry, Audrey. You won't have to deal with me for much longer. I'm going to get everything I deserve, and it won't be from this provincial little life." Soon after, she left for the West Coast, cutting ties with both her mother and my father, disappearing into a new, self-created identity, leaving behind only a trail of vague, boastful social media posts about her rising star in some nebulous philanthropic circles. We hadn't spoken in years. I had, with great relief, assumed she was gone from my life forever. But times Genevieve Ellis Whitmore, the elegant script on the marriage certificate, the affluent context of the ceremony, the philanthropist occupation, it all coalesced into a horrifying, impossible picture. My hands began to tremble again as I reached for my laptop, the certificate still clutched in my other hand. I typed Genevieve Ellis Whitmore into the search bar, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The results were immediate and overwhelming. Page after page of glossy images, society articles, charity event photos. And there she was, a woman of breathtaking beauty, undeniably glamorous, with sculpted cheekbones, perfectly arched brows, a small, elegant nose, and full, sensuous lips. Her hair, a cascade of golden waves, framed a face that was almost impossibly perfect. She was stunning, truly. But she was not the Genevieve Ellis I remembered. The old Genevieve had been attractive, yes, but her features were sharper, her nose slightly wider, her lips thinner, her jawline a little more pronounced. This woman was a masterpiece of modern cosmetic artistry. My fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for older images, desperate to find proof that this was a different person. I tried Genevieve Ellis and Santa Fe, philanthropist, then Genevieve Ellis Barbara, adding my mother-in-law's name, hoping for a clue. Eventually, a small, obscure local news archive from a decade ago surfaced, featuring a photograph of a younger Genevieve, attending a high school debate competition. There she was, the eyes, despite the drastic alterations, the undeniable transformation of every other feature. The eyes were the same, those same sharp, assessing eyes, now softened by clever makeup and surgical refinement. but unmistakable, and the faint, almost imperceptible scar above her left eyebrow, the one she'd gotten falling off her bike as a child, still there, barely visible beneath a layer of expertly applied foundation. A cold, undeniable certainty washed over me, stronger and more horrifying than the initial tremor of recognition. This wasn't just times a times Genevieve. This was times my times Genevieve. My estranged stepsister, the woman who had tormented me, envied me, and finally vanished from my life, had not just reinvented herself. She had completely times remade times herself. She had meticulously carved away every trace of her past identity, physically and emotionally, to become this dazzling, wealthy socialite. And Preston, my ex-husband, had married her. The room spun. The marriage certificate, the image of the transformed Genevieve on my screen, and the memories of her past malevolence merged into a single, monstrous realization. Preston hadn't just moved on to a better life. He had actively sought out and married the very embodiment of deceit and manipulation. He hadn't just abandoned me. He had replaced me with the woman who harbored a lifetime of animosity towards me. A woman who had spent years trying to diminish my existence. The depth of the betrayal was no longer singular. It was a horrifying, intricate web spun by two people I had once known intimately. A web designed to erase me completely from their newly crafted reality. My world, already shattered, now felt like it was crumbling into dust, revealing an abyss of calculated malice I had never imagined. The abyss yawned, not just beneath my feet, but within my very perception of reality. It wasn't just one person's betrayal. It was a grotesque dance of two, orchestrated by a woman who had always viewed my existence as an obstacle, and performed by a man who had sworn to love me. The revelation that Preston had not merely replaced me, but replaced me with times her asterisk, twisted a fresh, sickening knot in my stomach. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a deeply personal, almost targeted act of demolition. Genevieve, even the resurrected image of her on the screen, this dazzling stranger, couldn't erase the memory of the sharp, assessing eyes that had always found me wanting. Her resentment towards me, her stepsister, had been a constant, insidious current beneath the surface of our forced family dynamic. She'd resented my father's quiet integrity, the simple, uncomplicated love he offered, a love that she, with her own mother Barbara's transactional affections, had never truly known. My father, in his earnest kindness, had tried to embrace her, but Genevieve saw it not as inclusion, but as a threat, a dilution of her own perceived importance. She believed I embodied everything she was not. Content, genuine, and loved for who I truly was, not for what I could provide. Her ambition wasn't a healthy drive. It was a ravenous hunger, fueled by an almost pathological envy, and a burning desire for a life she felt she was inherently owed. She coveted wealth, status, and recognition, convinced that her true potential was being stifled by the modest provincial life she had been born into. She saw my academic pursuits as quaint, my simple joys as naive. Audrey is so naive, she'd sneered to my father. The words designed to chip away at his affection for me. She lives in her own little world. Life isn't always a fairy tale. Daddy. The way she'd pronounced daddy, a possessive claim on a man who wasn't her biological father, was a microcosm of her manipulative nature, always staking her claim, always blurring boundaries to her advantage. I remembered the art project, my painstakingly crafted watercolor. That accidental splash of muddy paint across the vibrant green hills had not been an accident. Her eyes, fleetingly, had held a flicker of cold satisfaction, a dark amusement that was far from remorse. It was a clear message. Asterisk. I can ruin what you create, and get away with it. Asterisk. And the message from my high school crush, conveniently forgotten to be passed along, leading to that awkward, humiliating misunderstanding. Genevieve thrived on subtly orchestrating chaos, on dismantling my small victories and undermining my connections, all while maintaining an outward facade of innocence or well-meaning forgetfulness. She saw my happiness not as something to share, but as something to diminish, to make room for her own. Her declaration that she wouldn't have to deal with me much longer, that she would get everything I deserve, had always haunted me. But I had dismissed it as teenage bravado, a dramatic exit. Now, it echoed with chilling prophecy. She hadn't just left. She had embarked on a ruthless campaign of self-reinvention. She carved away her old face, her old name, her old connections, meticulously erasing every trace of a past she deemed unworthy. It was a total annihilation, not just of her physical self, but of her entire identity, driven by an unyielding desire to embody the glittering life she felt she was entitled to. Her ruthlessness wasn't just a personality trait. It was a strategic weapon, honed to perfection. She discarded her mother, Barbara, with the same cold efficiency she discarded her old nose, her old life, anyone who reminded her of the self she despised. She craved not just wealth, but an untouchable veneer of perfection. A life so pristine, so opulent, that no one could ever question her worth. And Preston, the man who had once promised me a lifetime of simple moments, who had seen my smallness as a flaw, as a reason to discard me. Had he known, in his relentless pursuit of more, of someone who could navigate the complexities of his desired world, knowingly allied himself with my estranged stepsister? The thought was a sickening plunge into a deeper layer of betrayal. If he had known Genevieve's true identity, her history with me, then his actions were no longer just selfish abandonment. They were complicity in a long-standing vendetta. It transformed his calculated indifference into something far more sinister. A weaponization of her malice. He hadn't simply found a new partner. He had found a willing co-conspirator in the grand erasure of my past from his narrative. Or perhaps, had he been just as blind, just as easily manipulated by Genevieve's dazzling facade, as my father had been by Barbara's charms? Had she spun him a tale of a lonely, ambitious woman, rising from the ashes of a difficult past, perfectly suited to his own soaring ambitions? It was possible. Genevieve was a master illusionist. But then, to marry her within a week of our divorce, to build this opulent life so quickly, it spoke of a premeditated plan, not a chance encounter. It suggested a shared understanding, a mutual desire to achieve status and erase inconvenient truths. Preston's striving for more and Genevieve's ruthless ambition weren't just compatible. They were two sides of the same cold, calculating coin. The double betrayal was a wound unlike any other. It wasn't merely the pain of being left. It was the horror of being replaced by the very shadow that had always loomed over my life, amplified and perfected by cosmetic surgery and ambition. Preston's cold accusations of my smallness, my inability to keep up, now rang hollow. A flimsy justification for his own deceit. It wasn't about my failures. It was about his thirst for something glittering and artificial. Something Genevieve, in her transformed state, perfectly represented. He wasn't seeking true happiness. He was chasing an illusion of grandeur, mirrored precisely by Genevieve's constructed identity. They were two broken pieces, perfectly slotting into each other, not to heal, but to form a monstrous whole, united by their desire to escape their own unvarnished truths, and project an image of effortless superiority. Their union was not a love story. It was a declaration of war on authenticity. And I, unknowingly, had been the first casualty. Even as the image of Preston and Genevieve's deceitful union solidified in my mind, a grotesque monument to calculated artifice, life, stubborn and insistent, continued to unfold around me. The small victories of my reclaimed independence, nurtured by Sheridan's steadfast belief, slowly began to outweigh the crushing weight of their betrayal. I didn't forget. Not truly, but I learned to compartmentalize, to push the festering wound of their collective lie to the periphery of my daily thoughts. My new apartment, no longer merely a beige box, became a quiet haven, filled with the soft glow of lamplight and the rustle of turning pages. Months became a quiet procession, each one further distancing me from the epicenters of their manufactured drama. Or so I hoped. Then, on a Tuesday morning, a shrill, insistent ring ripped through the quiet solitude of my apartment. My phone, the screen flashed an unfamiliar number. But even before I consciously registered the New Mexico area code, a prickle of dread slithered down my spine. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button, a strange premonition twisting in my gut. It couldn't be, could it? After all this time, all this silence, the universe finally deciding to serve up another cruel twist? I answered, my voice a carefully neutral hello. A frantic, choked sound met my ear. A raw gasp that I recognized instantly, despite its distortion by panic. Audrey? Audrey? It's Preston. His voice was stripped bare, utterly devoid of the cold detachment I remembered. There was no pretense, no smooth control, only a visceral, barely contained terror. He sounded like a man drowning, desperate for a handhold, a jolt. A strange mix of morbid curiosity and lingering unease shot through me. What could possibly rattle the unshakable Preston Thompson to such a degree? He didn't wait for my response, plunging headfirst into a torrent of panicked words. It's the baby, Audrey. The baby. Something's wrong. We just had her. Genevieve, she gave birth last night. And she looks nothing like us, nothing at all like me. Or Genevieve. The doctors, they're confused. Everyone is. She has Times features asterisk. Features that just aren't ours. It's impossible. It has to be a mistake. The sheer absurdity of his confession, delivered with such naked terror, should have been comical. For a fleeting moment, a dark satisfying wave of schadenfreude washed over me. A bitter triumph. Asterisk his time's perfect. New life already crumbling at the edges. Asterisk his time's carefully constructed image. Threatened by a newborn's face. The poetic justice of it was almost too exquisite. But then, as his panicked words echoed, a flicker of something akin to pity, thin and fleeting, brushed against my heart. A helpless baby, caught in the web of their deceit. But that flicker quickly died, smothered by the chilling clarity that followed. The pieces, scattered and perplexing, suddenly clicked into place with a horrifying, undeniable logic. Asterisk, features that aren't theirs. Asterisk. The words resonated with a dreadful, absolute certainty. I knew exactly whose features that baby carried, and why Preston and Genevieve would find them so utterly terrifying. Preston, I began, my voice a calm, unnervingly steady counterpoint to his frantic confession. There's no mistake, the baby simply looks exactly as she's meant to look. Despite all Genevieve's efforts to sculpt a different reality, the line went silent for a moment, a stark contrast to his earlier torrent of panic. I could almost hear his mind working, scrambling to make sense of my words. What are you talking about, Audrey? Efforts? What efforts? This is our child. She's supposed to look like Times Us asterisk. His voice was still laced with terror, but now also with a bewildered frustration. Oh, she does look like us, Preston. I corrected. A faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. It wasn't a smile of mirth but of cold, hard satisfaction. She looks like the us's that Genevieve and you tried so desperately to erase. The us's that Genevieve used to be. There was a sharp intake of breath on his end, a sound of dawning comprehension mixed with utter disbelief. What are you saying? His voice dropped, suddenly hushed, as if the very air around him was now thick with an unspoken, terrifying truth. I'm saying, Preston, that your dazzling wealthy wife, Genevieve Ellis Whitmore, isn't quite who you think she is. Or perhaps, she's exactly who you think she is. Just refurbished. Her name, before she meticulously carved away every trace of her past identity, was Genevieve Ellis, and she's my estranged stepsister. I delivered the words with the precision of a surgeon making a clean incision, watching, in my mind's eye, as the truth began to bleed into his carefully constructed world. Another stunned silence, longer this time. I could picture him, pristine and polished, his perfectly coiffed world suddenly tilting on its axis. Your stepsister? No, that's impossible, Genevieve told me. She told me her family was estranged. Yes, but she looks nothing like the person you described. She's stunning. Flawless. His voice was a pathetic whisper of denial, grasping at the last vestiges of his grand illusion. Oh, she is stunning, Preston. That's precisely the point, I continued, my voice gaining a quiet, authoritative edge, the years of her subtle cruelties and my buried resentments giving it a chilling power. She spent a considerable fortune and underwent extensive cosmetic surgery to become that flawless, dazzling woman you married. A complete transformation. From her nose to her jawline, from her lips to her sculpted cheekbones, she wanted to erase every physical trace of the past she despised, to become someone entirely new, entirely opulent, entirely untraceable. I paused, letting the weight of that revelation settle. But here's the thing about genetics, Preston. They're rather stubborn. They don't forget. You can sculpt a nose, you can reshape a jaw, you can plump lips and lift brows, but the underlying genetic code, the DNA passed down, remains immutable. That little baby, your daughter, is simply inheriting Genevieve's original Times features. The ones she had before she spent years and thousands of dollars meticulously erasing them. The features of the Genevieve Ellis I knew. The features of my stepsister. The line crackled, and I could hear Preston's ragged breathing, fast and shallow. It was the sound of a man confronting a horror far worse than a mismatched baby. The complete unraveling of his entire fraudulent new life. No, you're lying, he stammered, though the conviction in his voice was gone, replaced by a desperate, failing attempt at defiance. This is some kind of twisted revenge. You're making this up, am I? I challenged softly, letting a hint of the long-suppressed bitterness finally seep into my tone. Did you ever see a picture of Genevieve's family, Preston? Her mother, Barbara? Or perhaps a picture of Genevieve before her stunning transformation? Did you ever wonder why someone so flawless had such a meticulously curated, utterly scrubbed social media presence prior to a certain point? Or why her estranged family was always so vaguely defined? His silence was a confession. He hadn't, or if he had deliberately overlooked it, blinded by the glittering prize. The baby, Preston, I continued, bringing it all back to the crux of his panic, is living proof of the very past you both so desperately tried to bury. She's the undeniable, genetic blueprint of the woman Genevieve really is. The one beneath all the artifice and ambition, the one who spent her life trying to escape her own truth, only for it to be born anew, right there, in her own child. I could hear him on the other end, a low, guttural sound escaping his throat, a strangled cry of dawning horror. It wasn't just the realization that his wife was a fraud, a chameleon. It was the crushing weight of knowing that he had been complicit in this elaborate deception, that his own new life had been built on a foundation of lies, orchestrated by the very woman he'd chosen to elevate. He had traded me, the small, comfortable wife, for a woman who was a walking, breathing monument to artifice and betrayal, only to have that artifice exposed by the most innocent and undeniable of witnesses. My stepsister, he finally choked out, the words laced with a profound, soul-shattering disbelief. You knew all along? The question was hurled at me, not with accusation, but with a desperate, pleading recognition of the sheer scale of the deceit. The implications for him for his image, for his carefully cultivated new world, must have been catastrophically clear. His entire pursuit of more, of a life free from my smallness, had led him directly into the arms of the very shadow that had haunted my past. I knew Preston when I saw the name on the marriage certificate, I clarified, my voice now laced with a cold, triumphant finality. And now? So do you. The truth has a way of revealing itself, doesn't it? Especially when you try so hard to bury it. I felt the connection sever on his end, abruptly, leaving me in the silence of my apartment. But this time, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was liberating. The raw, guttural cry I had heard from him, the sound of his carefully constructed world imploding, was the symphony of a justice I had never actively sought, but which had, against all odds, found its way home. The baby, that innocent little girl, was indeed living proof. Not just of Genevieve's past, but of the inescapable consequences of their shared, elaborate lie. The echo of Preston's choked gasp, though long faded from my ear, eventually gave way to a different kind of sound. The murmurs and whispers that reached me carried on the currents of our shared social circles. It began subtly. Fragments dropped casually by acquaintances, then gathered strength and detail through Sheridan, who possessed an uncanny ability to sift through rumor and extract hard truths, and, more surprisingly, from Sterling, a former colleague of Preston's, who re-emerged from the periphery of my life, seemingly compelled to share the unfolding drama. "Audrey, you won't believe it." Sheridan had buzzed one afternoon, her voice a mix of shock and righteous glee. A few weeks after my pivotal phone call with Preston, remember that big society fundraiser Genevieve was supposedly chairing in Santa Fe? Well, it was a disaster. Apparently, there was some kind of exposé brewing about her past, whispers about her family and, well, her original Times face. And Preston, being Preston, absolutely panicked. He accused her of deceiving him, of making him look like a fool in front of all his new, important contacts. I listened, stirring my tea, a calm satisfaction spreading through me. And what did Genevieve do? She went nuclear, of course, Sheridan scoffed. Said he was just as complicit, that he knew what she was doing for their future. Accused him of being a gold digger who only cared about her family's money and connections. Apparently, it was a spectacular public meltdown. Tables turned, champagne glasses smashed, the whole 9 yards. Sterling, when he called a few days later, added another layer of grim detail. He hadn't attended the event, but the gossip had traveled fast and wide within their high-flying circles. "Audrey," he'd said, his voice hesitant, "I heard about Genevieve and the baby. People are starting to talk about her transformation. And how the child shares a striking resemblance to photos of Genevieve times before times all the work." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. Preston's furious. He feels completely duped. He thought he was marrying into a pristine old money lineage, and now it's all tainted. He's telling everyone he had no idea, that she completely misled him. The irony was not lost on me. Preston, who had so ruthlessly orchestrated his own departure from our small life, now railing against being misled. He, who had sought only surface-level perfection and status, was discovering the hollowness of a life built on artifice. His ambition had led him into a gilded cage, and now the bars were showing. The unraveling, once started, proved swift and messy. Their marriage, built on a foundation of mutual deceit and a shared desire to erase inconvenient truths, couldn't withstand the pressure of exposure. The trust, or whatever transactional facsimile they had possessed, completely evaporated. Genevieve accused Preston of only being interested in her family's wealth, pointing to his own sudden job change and rapid ascent into her social sphere as proof of his opportunism. Preston, desperate to salvage his reputation, claimed utter ignorance of her past, painting himself as the innocent victim of her elaborate deception. The lavish parties and carefully curated public image shattered, revealing the ugly truth beneath. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened. Their divorce, announced less than a year after their wedding, was far less discreet than ours. This time, there were no cold emails or polite legal maneuvers. It was a public spectacle, fueled by mutual recriminations and accusations of infidelity. Preston, true to form, hadn't been able to maintain fidelity even in his perfect new life. It turned out he'd been spotted with other women, even while Genevieve was heavily pregnant. A testament to his ingrained self-serving nature. The web of lies they had spun together had become a trap, ensnaring them both in a cycle of mistrust and betrayal. He cheated on times her asterisk? I'd asked Sheridan, genuinely surprised. Though perhaps I shouldn't have been. Preston was a creature of habit after all. Oh, darling, it gets better. Sheridan had laughed. A sound like chimes. Apparently he was still chasing the time's next time's big thing. Even with Genevieve, he thought he'd bought into a fantasy, but when it started to crumble, he just looked for another exit. The ultimate irony, isn't it? He leaves you for someone who literally changed her entire face, and then he cheats on her times anyway. But the cruelest irony, the most poignant consequence, was reserved for their daughter. Sheridan heard it from a mutual friend who had seen Genevieve and her child at a high-end playground in Santa Fe. The little girl, a toddler now, had inherited the distinct genetic markers that Genevieve had so vehemently tried to erase: a wider nose, a more pronounced jawline, the same set of eyes that, when combined, clearly evoked the old face of Genevieve Ellis. Children, with their unvarnished honesty and brutal observations, began to notice. They're saying the other kids tease her, Sheridan recounted, her voice softening with a touch of genuine pity for the innocent child caught in this elaborate scheme. Calling her baby old face, or asking why she doesn't look like her pretty mom. Genevieve is beside herself. She's tried everything: new nannies, new schools, even subtle attempts at making the child's hair a different color. But you can't hide genetics, can you? Not from a world that remembers, or from children who just see times what's there. The image painted a vivid, almost unbearable picture in my mind. A little girl, an innocent casualty, bearing the living testament to her mother's desperate deceit, and her father's complicity. They had tried to build a new, perfect life by burying their true selves, by erasing history, by denying authenticity, and in the end, their own child had become the living, breathing evidence of their failure. A constant, unavoidable mirror reflecting the truth they had so vehemently rejected. The consequences, like a meticulously woven tapestry, had finally revealed their intricate, inescapable pattern. The final, bitter chapters of Preston and Genevieve's story, delivered to me in hushed tones and astonished whispers by Sheridan and Sterling, settled not as a roaring vindication, but as a quiet, definitive period to a long, arduous sentence. Their downfall, predictable in its self-serving trajectory, brought no grand exultation, no dancing in the streets. Instead, it offered something far more profound, a quiet, conclusive sigh of understanding. I had expected to feel a surge of triumph, perhaps even a vengeful glee, but what unfolded within me was a serene emptiness, a space where bitterness had once resided, now swept clean. The narrative of their lives, once entwined with mine in a painful knot, had fully unraveled, revealing its true, ugly threads. And in witnessing it, I finally felt completely untangled. My journey back to myself had been a gradual, painstaking ascent from the depths of betrayal. There were days, in those early months, when I thought I would never climb out of the shadow Preston had cast, never trust again, never truly smile without a tremor of sadness. But with each sunrise in my small, sun-drenched apartment, with each book I lost myself in, each quiet coffee shared with Sheridan, I pieced myself back together. I stopped chasing the ghost of the woman I thought I needed to be for Preston, and started rediscovering the woman I truly was. My career as a librarian, once viewed by Preston as small and comfortable, became a source of immense joy and quiet pride. I found profound satisfaction in connecting people with stories, in the hushed reverence of knowledge, in the tangible beauty of a well-loved book. I volunteered at a local animal shelter, finding solace in the unconditional affection of furry friends. I took up pottery, finding a meditative rhythm in the clay, shaping something beautiful and resilient with my own two hands. These were not grand gestures, not pursuits designed to impress or prove a point. They were simply mine. They were honest, nourishing, and deeply fulfilling. The understanding that bloomed in me was a revelation. True happiness was not an external reward, nor was it contingent on someone else's misery. It wasn't found in the glittering facade of status or wealth, or in the false promises of a manufactured life. It was a state cultivated from within, grown from self-acceptance, from resilience, from the courage to face my own truths and build something genuine. Preston had accused me of not evolving, of being content with smallness, but it was he who had remained stagnant, chasing an endless, hollow pursuit of more, never pausing to understand what truly mattered. Genevieve, in her relentless pursuit of physical and social transformation, had merely traded one prison for another, her perfect exterior masking a soul still tormented by its own insecurities and past. Their shared ambition was their shared cage. I thought about the child, the innocent little girl caught in the crossfire of their artifice. While a pang of sadness still resonated for her, it no longer carried the sting of my own pain. She was a living testament to an undeniable truth. You cannot escape who you are, or where you come from, by simply changing your outward appearance or your social circle. The genes, the essence, will always find a way to manifest. And that, in itself, was a powerful, immutable form of justice. There was no apology from Preston, and I had long ceased to need one. His forgiveness, once something I desperately craved, was now an irrelevant concept. To forgive him would imply that I was waiting for his validation, that his opinions still held sway over my self-worth. It didn't. I had learned to forgive myself for my own naivety, for the years I spent clinging to a love that had already died. That was the only forgiveness that mattered. My future, once a terrifying blank expanse, now felt like a serene horizon, stretching wide and inviting. It wasn't without its uncertainties, but it was my time's horizon, unclouded by anyone else's lies or ambitions. I was no longer a lighthouse keeper, desperately keeping a light burning for a ship that had long abandoned shore. I was the ship itself, charting my own course, guided by an internal compass that finally pointed true north. I had found freedom not in escaping the past, but in embracing the woman who had emerged from its ashes. I was whole, resilient, and utterly, wonderfully, myself. And that, I realized, was the most profound and beautiful ending of all.